All right, everybody, welcome. Honestly, I'm humbled that you actually came to hear my talk about project management and the Mac admin, because I know I'm sitting in between you and dinner and the feud, so which should be fun. I wanted to just take a quick moment here at the very beginning to thank everybody at PSU. The video, audio team, everybody here, they've all done a fantastic job. I hope you all agree. I also want to extend a thank you to my family, because they've been very supportive throughout my entire career. So I just wanted to give them a little bit of props. Obviously, I got a really cute family of cats and babies. So my daughter, that's pictured there, was born on Mother's Day. And my wife's first week back to work was this week. So I am going to be going home on Friday for that. So a little bit more about me. I work for Biogen. It's headquartered in Boston, in Cambridge. We do have global affiliates in Europe and Asia Pacific. I am one of 4 Chris's on a 4-person desktop engineering team. My boss's name is Bill, so that's the odd man out. So when he says, Chris, do something, then we all jump and do it. I'm predominantly responsible for 500 Macs, 12,000 Windows, about 12,000 or a little bit more Windows systems. So I share in that responsibility with the other Chris's. And over 8,000 mobile devices, combination of both Android, iOS, and about 85 to 90% of that is iOS. We are a Microsoft shop. We use Intune as our main MDM. We use Jamf for Mac management and select business uses on iOS. I've been able to use my technical experience for project management roles. I've also been able to use my experience as a project and people manager in technical roles. So kind of go hand in hand. So I just wanted to take the opportunity with this talk to kind of draw some parallels. I don't know how much you talk about project management in the Mac admin community, right? Some of you are in the EDU space, right? And you are the one sole person in IT, so you're the one that's managing the project. But then there's other enterprises that actually have formal project management departments that can take some of the burden and load off. I am PMP certified with PMI, which stands for the Project Management Institute. That doesn't mean I know everything about project management. I'm still learning and honing my skills. It's kind of an art. So, what I'm going over today is some stuff that's documented out there for a lot of the methodologies and different things, but really, you kind of have to take some creative form to it. So this was my abstract when you all signed up. How many of you chose to come here based on that single line and didn't look at the description? Okay. Well, my abstract to this talk is brief, but the art of project management is not. And it's filled with a lot of gray space, which a project manager can then fill in with some color. It is my intent to then bring some light to these areas. We're not going to go over any coding, debugging, or security. You've gone through that a lot this week in other sessions. But what I hope to achieve is to give you some ideas and tools that you can use in your everyday work, even for a personal organization for yourself. So if you have no formal reporting that you have to do to your management or anything like that, these are skills that you can even decide to use just on your own accord to keep yourself organized. Maybe you don't realize how actually of a skilled person you are. So if you are that single person, then you're probably already doing some of this, and you just need to have some realization that you're doing it. And so we're going to put some formality around what you may already be doing. We're going to put some fancy terms on it, some buzzwords. So just like the bartender at Legends, you can call, instead of a bartender, you can call him a mixologist, right? So we're going to go and give some fancy terms that are out there in the project management industry. So then you may be able to, refactor your resume, or if you're having review conversations with your management, you can use these buzzwords. Just make sure to that it only yields positive results, because I am not responsible for any layoffs or firings as a result. So you as a single IT person may be filling a role. Some organizations are lucky or unlucky, depending how you look at it. It really does depend on how you look at it, because that could be a blessing or a curse. Where they actually have a dedicated project management. Either way, the things I'm going to talk about are going to apply to either scenario. But knowing how a PM actually works. So if you're in that type of organization where you have that project manager, you'll hopefully be able to gain some skills to leverage them, so that it can take some burden off of you. So that you can focus on your tasks. So I'd figure I'd interject a little bit of dry humor in the presentation to keep the topic light and break up the monotony of it. I may also throw some bad jokes, some bad dad jokes in, just to see who's paying attention. And besides, this may be the only time I can get away with it, having a newborn. So this particular comic is about GitHub, and it is a tool set, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that later. So to get into some of the actual methodologies and frameworks, which is the meat of the presentation here. So it is important to note that there is not one answer to what methodology to actually apply. It is an art form, so you have to. You can feel free to be modular and pick and choose your favorite components. I'm going to go through some of the more popular methodologies that are out there. There are certainly others that I will not be able to address, given the time constraints. But so Waterfall. How many people of you have heard of Waterfall? Awesome. Well, I'm going to still go over it anyways for those who haven't, but it was introduced by Winston Royce, and he actually was calling out the flaws of Waterfall. So he wasn't, so it was kind of called out there by mistake. He was pointing out the flaws of how it was being used in software development. But it still has its place as the base methodology here. It's the foundation. Especially when you want a firm structure to the project. It's definitely a good one to default to if you don't know any other, know anything else. So just like a waterfall, you can't really go back upstream very easily, right? The project requirements are identified early on and documented. And the various phases are then gone through in a particular order. The next phase cannot be started without the previous being complete. If a change is introduced midstream, it may cause rework of the tasks that were already acted upon. Therefore, it may affect your scope, timeline, and possibly your budget. Client feedback and iterations of tasks must be planned and accounted for, as each iteration, in theory, adds time and complexity. A good visual for this is a Gantt chart. You should be kind of familiar with that picture, that kind of image, right? So they have a clearly the tasks have a clearly defined start and end point. The dependencies are evident, resources are assigned to the tasks, and they're generally not multitasking. It's very linear in how it works. Things come up in a project ad hoc, and Waterfall doesn't have to be as rigid as it sounds. You can feel free to be the judge on what is allowable to come into your project, so that you have. But you should know that you have the scope and the timing that are documented. Everything is very well documented here, where you can always fall back on that if you're afraid of scope creep or anything like that, and then you can do change management or however you want to invoke that change into your process. So Agile was introduced because of the lack of flexibility of Waterfall, that many, like Royce, pointed out. And so there was this whole movement. They created a manifesto. There a whole bunch of thought leaders came together. It's listed there, agilemanifesto.org. It's a really simple web page. It really just has the manifesto printed right up there. So it is important to note that Agile is not a noun, but an adjective that describes behavior. So, where it says here, individuals and interaction, right? Working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. Those are definitely things that describe a type of behavior that you're trying to enact here. So it's a very highly collaborative and adaptive to change, Agile. It is also accountable because they have that part in there about working software. So at the end of the Agile iteration that you're in, the output that you're expecting is a working product. Like, no matter what, you're going to have a working product, even if it's hello world. It can be as simple as that, and then you can build upon that. You can add, just think of the other different print statements that you can add to that. So it is very then results driven. The idea with Agile is to make sure that you're always producing results, and very fast too. The whole principle of Agile is to iterate quickly, so 2 to 4 week kind of sprints versus months and months of planning and coordinating and different things like that. We definitely see Agile effectively in practice through GitHub repositories, for example, where the documentation may not exactly be there, but there is a script or program that is reliable and works, and through collaboration can be responsive to changing conditions like new Mac OS releases. And GitHub also has some nice graphs that can be shown how often something is worked on or updated, so therefore some accountability tracking with that. There are 12 guiding principles of Agile that are important to understand. I'm not going to read all of them, but they essentially back up the manifesto. They're kind of just in addition to. They add more detail and context to the behavior that they're trying to convey, such as face-to-face meetings, regular reflections, support and trusting your team. That's a big one. So you have to have a lot of faith that your team is going to deliver, and there's not a lot of management overhead to Agile processes. Agile, unfortunately, is not a fit for everyone. There have been many attempts to adopt Agile within certain teams, and they've failed miserably. This can be mainly due to organizational constraints, such as management requiring timelines and fixed budgets. Agile works well when you have flexibility and maybe not a clear set of requirements, like in the Waterfall methodology, but requirements that can be developed over time. So you start out with that hello world, and then you just continue building on top of that. And that's why it has so much less management overhead, because you're trusting your team to then deliver on that next requirement. Again, because Agile is a behavior, there are methodologies that then adopt Agile behaviors and adherence to the manifesto and principles, like Scrum. Have you heard of Scrum? Okay. Scrum is the most popular and simplest to get a clearer idea of how to apply Agile. Scrum works best when resources in the development team are 100% focused. That means they're not on any other project, they're on yours and yours alone. There is no project manager in the title, but instead they would be referred to as a Scrum Master. Essentially, they are the facilitator of the processes, just helping to work with product owner and development team to clear any obstacles or issues that may be in the way. They are really the team advocator, right? And you can also refer to them as a mediator, because they can get in the middle of difficult situations. Scrum is organized into sprints. Sprints are the engine for Scrum. They are made up of prioritized items to what is called the product backlog. The product backlog can always be filling up with changing requirements and enhancements. So before a sprint begins, there's a sprint planning ceremony to prioritize what is going to be committed to in the upcoming sprint. A ceremony is just a fancy term for a meeting. This is not a wedding, but there is commitment involved. Daily scrums, again, daily meetings, are hosted to review progress and work together to clear up any issues. Sprint reviews, again, more meetings, are held to engage stakeholders for review and approvals. The iterative nature of the sprints allows this to cycle as many times until it's right. Focus on quality and the working product. The most important meeting of the meeting is the sprint retrospective, where there is reflection on what worked well, and let's continue doing that, and what didn't work, and how can we adopt to fix and make better for the next sprint. All right. I'm sorry. All right, moving on. Kanban. I don't know. If I mispronounce any of these, I do apologize. But Kanban has been around for a while, and it's formally been classified as Agile. It's just a very visual way of looking at the project. You may have heard of Kanban boards, which can be dealt with in a fancy tool like Atlassian. I don't know if you've heard of Atlassian. Trello is another one. Microsoft Planner, and there are several others. You can Google, and I'm sure you can come up with other free ones. Trello is a free service as well. So, but in simple practice, you don't even need to use software for it. You can just have a whiteboard or sticky notes on a wall. So in its simplest format, there are 3 classifications. There's to do, in progress, and done. You can add more categories where it makes sense, but the more you add, the less visually pleasing it can become. Kanban boards are probably the easiest thing you can actually implement for yourself to start out. Like if you have never done project management before, or you're kind of just keeping yourself organized, like your task list for the day or different things like that. And then if you start doing it for yourself and then you become brave enough, you can show it to your manager and say, this is what I'm up to. I have weekly one-on-ones with my manager, and having a list of tasks in front of me that I'm working on or that I've completed and that I still have to do helps us set expectations, and he can help tell me what priorities I may be missing in there. So we may work out and reprioritize some of the cards. So we can both visually see it, and it provides good accountability and transparency when things may have been put on hold in order to prioritize something else. The actual tool doesn't matter. I don't even use some of the software. Sometimes I just use, I have a Rocketbook that has erasable ink and pages, and I just do the same thing. I keep track of my to-dos there, note any issues, and I can report on them. Although it's just it may not be visually appealing, but it's visually appealing for me. Allison is a great one if you can invest in that. Trello is, I believe, also free, and that is what can get you started. And then if you're an MS shop, you may have Microsoft Planner at your disposal.
Sir?
Yeah.
I wanted to add one more piece of software up there. If
Yeah.
you have ServiceNow in your environment,
Oh, yeah?
there is a visual task board in there that's Kanban style.
Yep, exactly. I didn't put that in there, but yeah, if you're a ServiceNow shop, for sure, you can add that module. It's pretty easy. Lean is another one. Is another methodology. It really is basically doing more with less. It's exactly what it is. It's a lean lifestyle. So eliminating anything that doesn't add value, and there are these terms here, Muda, Mura, and Muri. Honestly, I forget what language they're exactly in, but they do have these meanings that, like, so Muda doesn't add value. Mura is more making sure that things flow smoothly, so it's scheduling. And like reducing any kind of things in the way, like approval processes, making those consistent. Murray then refers to managers and business owners imposing unnecessary stress on their employees, and other processes due to poor organization, unclear ways of working, and using incorrect tools. You may have heard of Lean Six Sigma, or even Six Sigma in there. So Six Sigma is very similar, and the combination of Lean and Six Sigma is exactly that. Six Sigma is, though, focused on manufacturing processes, so it's not really tailored to IT or anything else. And you may not necessarily apply Lean to a project, but it may be more used within your actual organization itself at a higher level, where or department, because it's more about driving business behaviors. That has to be championed from upper management. Okay, PMI. PMI is a global organization recognized and dedicated to the advancement of the profession. They provide to its members education, resources, and community of support. Kind of like, Mac Slack is our community support. PMI also provides similar resources and things for its members. PMI breaks up its education into 3 different domains. And these are documented in their PMBOK, or the Project Management Body of Knowledge. There are credentials there. Project management professional is the most popular one, but there's also program and portfolio management, and there's also credentials in Agile. And then they also broke up the different domains of risk and scheduling and things like that. So the credentials have to be upkept every 3 years. So you earn continuing education credits through going to different sessions and attending webinars and doing talks like this. The PMBOK is basically just a large book of resources with a ton of information. Basically, it's PMI's vision on how a project functions and is stepped through. It organizes the steps of a project into process groups, which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and finally closing. Then there are knowledge areas on the vertical axis of the table there, like scheduling, quality management, risk management, stakeholder management. And these knowledge areas have components within each of the process groups. As you move through the process groups, logically you trigger components in one or some of all of the knowledge areas. It is incredibly in-depth, and therefore I'm not going to go over it. But I did want to point out that there are tool recommendations in there, and also other insightful materials that you can get. That if you can get your hands on a copy of the PMBOK, it is surely worth the lengthy read. All right. Huh? Say that again? Oh, I'm sorry. That was an airplane movie reference. If you didn't get that. Prince 2 is an honorable mention here. It was developed in the UK for government IT projects. It's maintained by a company called Axelos. I don't believe they are a nonprofit. You have to double check me on that, but they are the other globally recognized certification, and it's very much like getting ITIL, because you start out with like a Prince foundation, and then you build from there in specialties. The framework itself is very similar to PMI and the PMBOK, but there are significant differences in that no PM experience is needed to credential in Prince 2, but PMI requires some documented experience even to get baseline certification. A second difference from the framework perspective is that you have to have continued business justification. So it is very heavy on documentation and justification. So at pretty much like within every single of their knowledge areas and so forth, there is this continued business justification step that you have to that you have to do. You can learn more by going to their Axelos' website, which is listed right there. Critical path management is another one out there, where you basically categorize your tasks and map the dependencies, similar to Waterfall, but then you basically prioritize the resources and line up what tasks can be done sequentially. So this allows some multitasking to actually happen within kind of like a waterfall style organization. Critical chain project management recognizes the end goal first, and then it works backwards using past experience to do resource estimating and interdependencies between the resources. It emphasizes efficient use of resources by reducing loss of productivity. So at no single moment is any one of your resources going to be underutilized. They're always going to be doing something. It may not be something that you ever put into practice, but just know that these things are out there. So to tie some of it together, it's important that you know how your organization runs and what is expected of you. There are some things you may be able to change or influence, but others you may be hitting up to a rock wall and getting nowhere. So just know what your constraints are. You can start to kind of map it out and figure out where some of your roadblocks are going to be, and then figure out like what is going to be the best style of project management for you. Communication is the pinnacle here of each of the methodologies and the frameworks. In Agile, it's extremely collaborative, where there's meetings for everything. Now, you can have meetings, you can do status reports, you can have impromptu conversations. These are all forms of communications that are going to help set expectations for yourself, your team, and your stakeholders. Everyone is not going to appreciate the same level of communication as another person. My manager may have a different expectation of what gets communicated to him versus my VP and my EVP and my CEO. They may just not care about a lot of the details. So you may have to tailor your message to the audience. It doesn't mean you don't have to include everything in your one status communication. It just may mean that you refactor it, or you move things around to kind of address the high points at the very beginning, and then if somebody wants to drill down, underneath the fold of an email, scroll down, they can then see like charts and actual status reports and issues perhaps, and other details. And if the CEO really wants to go into that detail, for sure they can do that. You may not be like if you're running a project, you may not be communicating with a CEO. In the EDU cases, you may be, interfacing with like your dean or whomever, and they just may not care about the intricacies of what you do on a daily basis. But they have an investment in the project. That's the important thing. So, you need to make sure to tailor your communications to kind of meet what they want to see. So if something isn't going well in your project, don't try to hide it. Be upfront, get the help and support you need from management, do what you got to do, get support from others around you, your team, and everybody. Let's see. PMI spells it out in their code of ethics. Spells out in their own code of ethics, which you actually must test on and pass to be credentialed, kind of like Apple's lithium battery handling instructions for GSX. But basically, if you see something, say something. Be legit. Don't try to hide facts or data. Be true to yourself and use common sense. It is okay to take elements from one approach and weave it into another. Again, I said the art of project management. And you can feel free to skip components of methodologies entirely. This is actually called hybrid methodology, and it is well accepted in practice. You know your project, you know your organization. Just do what works to keep the project afloat and keep yourself organized. It is necessary to ensure your team, management, and all stakeholders are on board. That your management and all your stakeholders are on board, familiar with how you're managing the project, tools, processes, and et cetera. So if you're on a multi-person team, you may get resistance if it takes too much overhead, and things will just keep on, and if things keep on failing, because they don't know like what you're trying to do by implementing these processes, right? And also the tool choice that you use. Allison and ServiceNow and things like that, people may not be familiar with how to actually utilize those tools. Like they're fairly intuitive to a degree. Like, you could kind of figure it out. But if it takes too much effort, you may get some people upset. If you try to make things too complicated. If it is for your own personal organization, you're just only going to upset yourself if you make it too complicated. So here are just a short list of tools here. Column on the left is software. Column on the right is actual project management termed tools where you have the project plan, issue log, status report, so forth. Status report is probably the one that I would highly encourage you spend some time on depending on who your stakeholders are, to tailor. You can try to figure out how you can minimize your efforts by making one communication that addresses everybody, or if you need to, you can you can do separate communications if absolutely necessary. But that's what a communication plan is for. So you can kind of have that documented, what communication goes to what. All right, this should be my last one. Do you get that one? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that there would not be people who didn't know airplane. I apologize. So, just to go over some projects in practice here. So, for an iPad rollout, we recently did this at my company. We deployed over 500 iPad Pros over a course of 3 days. To an entire department at their annual conference. So we were at a hotel just like this, or at a conference center, kind of just like this. So we had all kinds of things to think about, like cellular connections, Wi-Fi, and different factors that played in there. So we chose to utilize Waterfall methodology kind of on this, because we had a finite budget. And there was very definitive timing, okay? So, their conference was happening no matter what. There was an expectation that we were going to deploy these iPads at that conference. So we had to meet that expectation. So that's where Waterfall kind of allowed us to, have that scheduling and drive to the completion of the project. Some of the challenges here, so we had an initial commit of 500 devices with Apple. They didn't have enough stock to start with because, we were at, the conference was in January and we were ordering in November and December for that end of January deliverable. So Christmas. The other questions were, around the smart folio keyboards. They also didn't have enough stock of those. I think they didn't anticipate as many people wanting the smart folios or something. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but they were limited in quantities, I think, even in the stores, so you couldn't even go to an Apple store to really get them, at least in our area. But the choice that we had was, do we deploy the iPads without the accessories? And we put that in our risk register and logged the risk, and our management actually accepted it, and because we had a contingency plan in place. We still deployed the iPad, we could still deploy the iPads and didn't require the keyboards. There are also external factors that would assumed to be working. But our networking team or our AD team decided to do some changes, and it impacted how everything ended up connecting. So we assumed that these things would be working properly, but then when we went just 2 days before, all of a sudden we had to kind of then rework and kind of try to factor that in and figure out what contingency plans were going to be around that. Mac OS upgrades, such as Mojave or even prepping for Catalina. So we need to be business ready with software and processes because the new systems will be received with that new OS in September. That's just the bottom line. So Apple has their definitive rollout date. We have to be ready. But we can do a little bit of Waterfall and Agile towards this because it's just internal budget at this point. So it's just me applying, my own resources or whatever to, get this all working. And Apple has their rollout date set in stone, so that's where Waterfall is in play. But there are Agile components to this. So the new hardware after the rollout date, you can't go back to the previous version. So what I did there was we procured beforehand. So that we could buy some time to resolve those conflicts. So we would, procure 50 or 100 systems or whatever we figured we would need, and so that we could continue to work and iterate on the issues. Vendors. And functional groups and stuff like that, like for security software, right? That's another one. So, we just needed a plan in that time for that. For us, beta tests can be a good indication, but we also don't rely on the release to market candidate either, as what we're going to have to necessarily live with. My MDM may not necessarily be 100% ready, but I can then develop those workarounds and contingencies. I can put stuff in GitHub and kind of iterate through those changes in that way. Office 365 rollout. So Microsoft has their rollout plan, their rollout schedule for when they're coming out with O365 releases. This is a combination of Waterfall and Scrum because really there's no budget, but we have to keep things up to date with N-1 in mind because we have because of security updates. So. So the considerations and the challenges here are that the security updates are not rolled or they're not rolled separate from the feature updates. So I have to live with feature updates. So my user training team may need to train users on new features that are coming out in the next release. I also have a decision whether to use an app store distribution or a MAU distribution or some other kind of distribution. You just have to know the limitations of what those different things are. Like apps won't update when the app is actually open. When you're trying to deploy it through the App Store version. Config for profile changes. I can use Scrum to sprint through that and rework the configuration profiles. Have the new requirements in play and develop and keep those updated. And then my approval processes, test it and make sure that it works in production. So the other bits here are that. You have your own scripts. So you have a custom script to perform a specific function repeatedly, right? For this, it's really no budget. It's your own time. The challenges are that, or really the considerations that you have is, do you have a clear idea of your requirements? What if the OS environment changes, like Python 2.7 versus Python 3.6? or bash versus the new shell, right? And then source control. Any other collaborator, are there gonna be any other collaborators other than yourself on this? Like, are you the sole developer? And what if you leave your institution or company, and do you have a process for managing the upkeep? Do you have that documented anywhere? So if you use any of these tools and you're transparent about it with your manager could even piece some of the things, some of the tasks and different things together. So you may not necessarily formally go over it with somebody, but they can kind of, have a reference point or something to, look back on if you're using a tool like that, or if you're keeping a notebook or something. They can, actually, I hate to say do detective work, but it can be, some things can be inferred. So that's it. Are there any questions or comments? No? Yeah.
Good shoot. Good throw. Hey, how you doing? So I'm kind of a new Mac admin past year. Often I'm working on projects myself. I think kind of your last slide kind of hit upon it. What are the best ways you think I could manage, starting out, manage my own projects? Whether it's, I don't know, work, writing scripts or deployment, or just maybe even managing my own day or time. Any suggestions for a new Mac admin that might work mostly on their own?
So you can easily start out with sticky. One thing is you can that I've done before is sticky notes, either software or even on a whiteboard or something. But basically, you keep track of your tasks. Hold yourself accountable, right? Just know what your to-dos are. Figure out what your organizational objectives are, right? Your day-to-day tasks are going to revolve around what you have to do to meet your organizational needs. Now, that may be dictated to you by management, or you have to infer that by the way that your institution works, right? So if you're in the education space and so forth, it's not going to be told to you that new students are coming in August, September. You just have to know that that's happening, and that's your organization, right? So you plan different things around those known things about your organization. So there's things that you can infer, and then there are things that are going to be told to you that you have to do to meet your organizational requirements. Maybe you're going to instead of Office 365, you're going to transition from Office 365 to Google Docs. So you kind of have to look at that and basically have a crystal ball in a way to figure out what's coming up next. Sort of try to be as ahead of the game as possible, but don't be afraid of mixing change into that, because things are going to just change constantly. So did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, it helped a lot. Thanks.
Yeah.
I ran into a problem with a vendor at one point who was building something. They finished building it, wasn't the greatest, and then when I went, where's the documentation? They went, well, it was Agile.
Yeah, Agile doesn't put strict focus on documentation. So if you are working with a developer, so at least at least where I work, when we work with developers, we have statements of work. And you make sure that those requirements are in your statement of work. because that is how you're going to control your scope. So you kind of have to control it in a different way than they do, so that your expectations on that final output product is actually met. So if it's not documented, then basically assumptions can be made, and there is nothing for you to fall back on. I used to do contract management for a previous company when I was doing service delivery management and project coordination, different things. You know, a lot of my job was, you know, a salesperson wanted to sell something. You know, they just wanted to do whatever they needed to do in order to sell the service. But I needed to make sure that, you know, I needed to make sure that our constraints were in there and that, you know, the customer was getting what they expected out of it. And you know, that the appropriate time in that scope of work also was budgeted, because we were paying, sometimes we were doing hourly versus flat fee and different things. So depending on the contract, you know, you kind of have to look at details like that. Does that help? Did that answer?
Yeah, it does.
Perfect.
With Kanban, do you recommend one board for all of your projects, or do you break out the boards into separate projects? How do you do that?
So so I have one board for personal. Like I actually have a board that I use for my house projects. I have an at work, like daily to-dos, like operational stuff that I'm doing. And then really it depends on the project, right? Like, so, you know, some are going to be really, really simple. And does it make sense that if there's like 3 tasks to a project, are you going to really spend time spinning up a Kanban board just for that, right? So you kind of got to weigh the cost of setting it up to the level of effort that the project is, you know, demanding. So just keep that in mind and make your work life easy for you. That's really what project management is kind of all about. It's kind of, you know, you can use it to manage very, very small things, but then there are these big things like full building build outs, like construction projects. And things like that have, you know, you have to work with unions and you have to work with, you know, the metal guys and the sheetrock guys and the fire department and various things. Like, you have to keep track of all of that, right? So on projects like that, yeah, you're going to want, you know, you're going to want your own thing to separate it out from the other stuff, and especially if you have to report on that. Right? So it's also going to depend on what your reporting structure is like. If you have to report on your project separately or if all together is okay. Did that help?
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm going to hit somebody with this.
Nice throw. And nice catch. Got to give credit where credit's due. Keep your team happy. Remember that.
So I was wondering, is there any project management training or certifications that you think would provide sort of general benefit?
So when I took the PMP exam, I failed the first one because I did it on my own, and because it was a lot of material to deal with. So I do recommend like if you're going for like Prince 2 or PMI or something very structured and you know, that has a lot of stuff to it, that sometimes training programs are good to look into. Now, PMI on their website, they actually have recommendations of accredited like education providers on there, so you can look at those resources. In addition, New Horizons is good, or has been very good for me. You know, it also depends on the instructor too, but I think you know, the additional training that I took was virtual, and you know, even in a virtual setting, it was perfectly fine. And that gave me additional study material to look at because they gave me a different way of looking at it than just like so if you take the PMBOK, it's like 300, 400 pages of material. and to sort that out, they did actually a really good job explaining everything and how everything integrated all together, so that when I went and sat in front of the proctor and took the test, I had a better shot of passing. And also there is some benefit to it too, is because some training programs will offer or like retraining credits if you fail or something like that. There may be things to look into there as well.
And you found that through PMI?
You can go onto PMI site. They do have lists of like their preferred education providers or ones that are registered with them. But New Horizons is, personally for me, New Horizons was great when I took it. And I took it, I took it, what, like seven years ago? But they've been tried and true. Any trainings that I've taken through them has been fine.
I think I used them for Apple training once.
I'm sorry?
I think I used them for Apple training once.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's projectmanagement.com, that's another one. PMI actually owns that, but it's projectmanagement.com. They're their own website and they have their own resources, but they're still affiliated. Yeah. Also, get involved, like if you're interested in PMI and PMP type stuff, there are local chapters available, so just kind of look into it. And a lot of the local chapters will actually host training sessions, and those will be more, some of those may be free because they're more like study sessions, or they may have some paid ones that are a little cheaper because they're paying an instructor a flat fee, and by the number of people who attend, the cost goes down for you.
They can also come to you.
And they can also come to you, right? You can arrange that as well. Yep. Did that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Oh, we have time on the clock. No? Well, if there are any other questions, I will be around. I do thank you for attending, and hope that you got some value out of it. Again, thank you.